I never meant to survive that night, and sometimes I wish I hadn't. The screech of tires, the crunch of metal folding like paper, the scream that wasn't mine, but echoed in my chest. It's all there, looping in my mind like a broken reel. I was 17, young, reckless, and untouchable, or so I thought. That night shattered every illusion. It took my parents and left me with a void that I carry even now, 5 years later. But it also gave me Charlie. I met him on a rain-soaked autumn evening, days after I'd been discharged from the hospital. I wasn't looking for anything, least of all a reason to keep going. I had dragged myself outside, hoping the cold might numb me. My parents' house felt like a mausoleum, every corner filled with their absence. I wandered aimlessly through the streets until I heard it. A soft, pitiful whine coming from an alley. I found him cowering behind a pile of garbage bags, his fur matted and streaked with dirt. His eyes, wide and amber, met mine, and for a moment, I forgot how empty I felt. He didn't trust me at first. Who could blame him? But I sat there in the rain, murmuring nonsense, letting him see I wasn't a threat. Eventually, hunger won out. He took the piece of sandwich I'd offered and, cautiously, followed me home. Charlie saved me before I even realized I needed saving. Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm 22 now, living in a small but cozy apartment in the city. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine. I'm dating someone, Noah. He's great, really. Kind, funny, and just the right amount of awkward. But sometimes I feel like I'm holding something back, something Noah can't reach. Because the truth is, my heart already belongs to someone else. And no, it's not another man. It's Charlie. My dog. My savior. My shadow. My everything. Over the years, Charlie and I have built a world together, just the two of us. He was there when I woke up screaming from nightmares, his warm body pressed against mine as if to anchor me. He was there when I packed up the house I grew up in, his wagging tail a reminder that life goes on, even when it feels like it shouldn't. And he's here now, sprawled on the floor beside me as I write this, his snores a soft counterpoint to the rain tapping against the window. Charlie has always been more than just a dog. I knew it from the moment he padded into my life. He's a confidant, a guardian, and sometimes the only reason I've dragged myself out of bed. But not everyone gets it. My friends joke about it all the time, about how obsessed I am with my dog. Do you ever, leave him alone? Maddie teased one afternoon as we sat outside a cafe. Charlie was curled at my feet, his head resting on my boot. She reached down to scratch behind his ears. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's cute and all, but you act like he's your boyfriend or something. He's more reliable than most boyfriends, I shot back, only half joking. Charlie perked up at the sound of my voice, his tail thumping against the pavement. I bent down to ruffle his fur, smiling as his tongue darted out to lick my hand. At least he doesn't forget my birthday, or ghost me when I'm having a bad day. Maddie laughed, but I could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. You know we love Charlie, she said, softer now. But sometimes it feels like you're shutting the rest of us out. Like, you're too wrapped up in him. I wanted to argue, to brush her off with a laugh, but deep down I knew she wasn't entirely wrong. It wasn't that I didn't love my friends. I did. But none of them had been there when the walls closed in and breathing felt impossible. None of them had stayed by my side through the kind of silence that feels like it might swallow you whole. Charlie had. Noah brought it up too, once, though he tried to hide it behind a smile. You and Charlie, he said, shaking his head as he watched me pack a bag for an overnight trip. I'd made sure to include Charlie's favorite blanket and a stash of his favorite treats. It's like you're a package deal. We are, I said lightly, tossing the bag over my shoulder. Charlie trotted to my side as if to prove the point. Noah chuckled, but there was a tightness to it. I don't mind, really. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm competing with him. I stopped, startled. Competing? Noah shrugged, his gaze sliding away from mine. He gets so much of your attention. It's like there's no room for me. His words sat heavy between us. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he meant just as much to me as Charlie did. But that wasn't true. The kind of bond I shared with Charlie wasn't something I could explain, not in a way that would make sense to Noah. So I said nothing, and the silence stretched. Charlie's always been my rock, but our connection grew even deeper after that night last winter. It was late, and the streets were eerily quiet as I walked Charlie home from the park. Snowflakes clung to his fur, and his breath came out in soft puffs, visible in the frigid air. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how beautiful the city looked draped in white. Then I heard it, heavy footsteps, too close and too fast. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned to see a man closing the distance between us. His face was shadowed, but the way he moved set every nerve in my body on edge. I tightened my grip on Charlie's leash, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Come on, buddy," I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady as I quickened my pace. But the man followed, his footsteps mirroring mine. And then Charlie growled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the leash. I glanced down to see him standing rigid, his ears pinned back and his teeth bared. I'd never seen him like that before. He looked wild, feral, like he'd fight to the death if he had to. The man froze. For a moment, we just stood there, the three of us locked in a tense standoff. Then the man cursed under his breath and backed away, disappearing into the shadows. I dropped to my knees, burying my face in Charlie's fur as my whole body trembled. "Good boy," I whispered, over and over. "You're such a good boy." From that night on, Charlie never left my side. Not that he ever had, really. But after that, I understood in a new way just how much he meant to me, and how much I meant to him. Maddie says I'm too dependent on him. Noah says I need to learn to let other people in. Maybe they're right. But Charlie isn't just a dog. He's my anchor, my protector, my home. And maybe that's something only he and I will ever fully understand. It was one of those nights where everything felt heavy. My body, my thoughts, even the air around me. Noah and I had argued earlier, though I couldn't even remember about what now. Something trivial, no doubt, but it had left a sour note in my chest that lingered long after he left. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft click of Charlie's nails against the floor as he followed me into the kitchen. I didn't bother with a proper dinner. Instead, I grabbed the jar of peanut butter from the cupboard and a spoon from the drawer. I sank onto the couch, curling my legs under me, and twisted the lid off. Charlie patted over, his amber eyes fixed on the jar with laser focus. He sat down in front of me, his head tilted slightly, ears perked in that way that made him look like he was listening to every thought swirling in my head. "Don't judge me," I muttered, scooping a generous spoonful of peanut butter and shoving it into my mouth. Charlie wagged his tail slowly, as if to say, "Who? Me? Never." I laughed around the spoon, the sound bubbling up despite the weight of the evening. "You think you're slick, don't you?" I said, pointing the spoon at him. "You're just waiting for me to cave and give you some." His tail thumped against the floor, and he inched closer, his gaze unwavering. I sighed, shaking my head, but the truth was, I didn't mind. There was something comforting about his presence, the way he always seemed to know when I needed company, without asking for anything in return. Well, except maybe a bite of peanut butter. "Fine," I relented, dipping my finger into the jar and holding it out to him. His tongue flicked out eagerly, warm and rough against my skin. I couldn't help but smile. "You're such a little thief, you know that?" Charlie licked his lips, clearly satisfied, and rested his chin on my knee, his eyes still locked on me. It wasn't just about the peanut butter. I could feel it. He was watching me, not the jar. Watching me in that way he always did, like I was the most important thing in his world. It was both humbling and heartbreaking. Something changed in that moment. "I don't deserve you," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I set the jar aside and leaned down, burying my face in his fur. He smelled like home, warm and familiar, with a faint hint of the lavender shampoo I used on him after his last bath. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stayed there, steady and solid beneath me. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The intimacy of the moment, the way his heartbeat thrummed against mine, as if to say, I'm here. You're not alone. I wish you could talk, I murmured, pulling back to look into his eyes. You'd probably tell me to stop being such a mess, huh? Charlie tilted his head again, his expression so earnest it almost made me cry. Instead, I laughed softly and scratched behind his ears, feeling the tension in my shoulders start to ease. Thank you, I said, even though I knew he couldn't understand. For always being here. His tail wagged again, slow and deliberate, as if to say, always. I took the peanut butter pot again, Charlie's tail wagging harder. I took the spoon and dipped it into the pot, scooped a big lump and pulled it off. I carried it over with the pot to the living room sofa and plonked myself down. Charlie followed me, desperately etching for another scoop. I picked up the lump, bringing it to my mouth, and it fell down into my lap, on my skirt. Charlie, without notice, galloped to me and began licking up without despair. What happened next, I will not be going into detail. It was surprising, pleasant, and welcomed. The next level of intimacy had been hit at that moment. Life with Charlie was a rhythm I didn't know how to live without. He fit into every corner of my day, from the way he'd nuzzle me awake in the mornings, to how he'd curl up at my feet while I worked, his quiet presence grounding me. Noah had grown to accept Charlie's place in my life, but it wasn't always easy. There were moments of tension, when Noah would reach for my hand on the couch and find Charlie already lying there, his head in my lap. You know, Noah joked one evening, if you ever had to choose between me and Charlie, I'm not sure I'd win. I laughed, but the comment stuck with me. Noah wasn't wrong to feel that way. Sometimes I wondered myself if there was enough space in my heart for both of them. But life has a way of making decisions for you, whether you're ready or not. It happened on a sunny afternoon. The park was alive with the chatter of children and the occasional bark of other dogs. Charlie and I had gone for one of our usual walks, the kind that let me clear my head and reminded me how much I loved having him by my side. He was chasing a ball I'd thrown when it happened. I heard the screech of bike brakes before I saw the cyclist. They were coming too fast, veering off the path to avoid a child who had darted in front of them. Charlie, always curious, turned at the sound, and before I could call him back, the bike collided with him. Time slowed. I saw Charlie tumble, heard his yelp of pain, and felt the air rush out of my lungs as if I'd been hit instead. I ran to him, my hands shaking as I knelt by his side. He was lying on his side, his chest heaving, one of his legs twisted at an unnatural angle. Charlie! I choked out, tears blurring my vision. His eyes found mine, wide and full of pain, but there was no fear there, only trust. It was as if he knew I would make it better. The cyclist stopped, horrified and apologetic, but I barely heard them as I scooped Charlie into my arms. He whimpered softly, his body limp against mine, and I felt a fresh wave of panic. I flagged down a passing car, the driver, a kind stranger, agreeing to take us to the nearest vet. The waiting room was sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth I needed in that moment. I paced back and forth, my hands gripping my phone like a lifeline. I'd called Noah, who said he'd be there as soon as he could, but I didn't want to wait. I wanted Charlie back, whole and safe. The vet finally emerged, her expression calm but serious. He's stable, she said, and I felt my knees almost give out in relief. He's got a broken leg and some bruising, but we'll need to do some more tests to rule out internal injuries. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Can I see him? She hesitated. He's still groggy from the sedative, but I'll let you sit with him. When they brought Charlie out, my heart shattered. He was lying on a padded mat, his leg bandaged and splinted, his usually vibrant eyes half-lidded and dull. But his tail wagged, just once, when he saw me. I dropped to my knees beside him, stroking his head gently. Hey, buddy, I whispered, my voice breaking. You're so brave. We're gonna get through this. I promise. The days that followed were hard, harder than I'd expected. Taking care of Charlie became a full-time job, and I threw myself into it without hesitation. Carrying him outside for bathroom breaks, administering his medication, keeping him calm and comfortable. It was exhausting, but I didn't care. He'd done so much for me. It was my turn to be there for him. Noah tried to help, but there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. One night, after I'd spent hours sitting by Charlie's bed, Noah pulled me aside. "You're amazing with him," he said, his voice quiet. "But it feels like I'm not even here." I stared at him, guilt twisting in my chest. "I'm sorry, I can't lose him, Noah, I can't." "I know," he said, his hand brushing mine. "But I need you too, Hannah. I want to be here for you, but I don't know how to fit in when it's always about Charlie." I didn't know what to say to that. The truth was, I didn't have an answer. Charlie recovered slowly, but steadily. The first time he managed to stand on his own, I cried. Big, ugly tears that Charlie tried to lick away, despite his own discomfort. It felt like a victory, a sign that we'd made it through the storm together. But the experience left its mark. I realized how much I relied on Charlie, how deeply our lives were intertwined. It wasn't just about loyalty or companionship. It was about survival. He'd carried me through my darkest days, and now I'd carried him through his. But it also made me question everything else. My relationships, my priorities, the way I held people at arm's length. Noah stayed, patient but wary, as if he was waiting for me to choose, between him and Charlie, between the past and the future. And maybe he was right to feel that way. Maybe it was time for me to figure out what I wanted and where I was going. In the weeks after Charlie's accident, our bond grew even deeper, if that was even possible. I spent hours lying on the floor with him, my head resting against his side as his chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. His eyes, always so full of warmth, held a quiet reassurance, as if he was reminding me that we'd made it through the worst together. Sometimes I'd talk to him, the words spilling out as if he could truly understand. "You've seen me at my best and my worst, haven't you, buddy?" I'd say, running my fingers gently through his fur. He'd blink up at me, his tail giving a soft wag in response. There were nights when I'd wake from a dream, my parents' laughter, the sound of the crash, the aftermath, and find Charlie already awake, his nose nudging my hand, his presence anchoring me. He was more than a dog. He was my constant, my lifeline. But as Charlie healed, I realized that my life couldn't remain in this suspended state forever. Noah was patient and kind, but I could sense his growing unease. He wanted more from me, more time, more connection, more of my heart. And as much as I loved Charlie, I knew he couldn't be my whole world forever. One afternoon, as Charlie dozed on the couch, I sat down with Noah. The conversation was long overdue. "I feel like I've been failing you," I admitted, the words heavy on my tongue. "I don't mean to shut you out. It's just, Charlie's been my rock for so long, and I don't know how to let anyone else in." Noah took my hand, his touch warm and grounding. "I don't want to take anything away from what you have with Charlie," he said softly. "I love that you love him so much, but I need to know there's room for me too. For us." His words lingered with me, forcing me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding. I was holding back, scared to risk loving anyone else as deeply as I loved Charlie. Because what if I lost them too? But Noah wasn't asking me to choose. He was asking me to try. And for the first time, I realized that maybe I could. Charlie was there when Noah proposed. We were sitting on a picnic blanket in the park. Charlie sprawled out beside us, chewing on a stick. Noah pulled out a small box, his hand trembling slightly as he opened it to reveal the ring. "Hannah," he said, his voice steady despite the tears glistening in his eyes. "I love you, and I want to build a life with you. A life that includes Charlie, of course. Will you marry me?" Charlie, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, dropped his stick and looked up at us, his tail wagging slowly. I laughed through my tears, reaching out to stroke his head. What do you think, buddy? Should I say yes? Charlie barked once, and that was all the encouragement I needed. Yes, I said, throwing my arms around Noah. Yes, yes, yes. Life shifted after that. Noah and I got married in a small ceremony with Charlie as our honorary ring bearer, proudly sporting a bow tie that matched Noah's suit. We moved into a house with a big backyard, where Charlie could roam freely. He adjusted to the changes with ease, his tail wagging at every new adventure. When our first child was born, a little girl named Lily, Charlie became her protector and constant companion. He'd sit by her crib, his head cocked as if listening for her breathing, and follow her around the house as she grew, always patient, always gentle. By the time our second child, Max, came along, Charlie was a seasoned expert at being the family dog. Watching Charlie with the kids was bittersweet. He was older now, his muzzle flecked with gray, his movements slower and more deliberate. But his love never wavered. He was still the same loyal, steadfast presence he'd always been. The day we said goodbye to Charlie was one of the hardest of my life. He'd lived a long, full life, but his body was tired, and it was time to let him go. We gathered around him at the vet's office, Lily and Max holding his paws as I stroked his head, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking. "For everything. For being there when I needed you most. For loving me, even when I couldn't love myself. You're my hero, Charlie." His eyes met mine one last time, full of that same unwavering trust, before they closed for good. Life without Charlie was an adjustment, but he'd left behind a legacy of love and resilience that shaped everything I did. Noah and I told the kids stories about him, how he'd saved me, how he'd been my rock when I had no one else. We hung a picture of him in the living room, his tail caught mid-wag, as if to remind us that joy is always within reach. And though he was gone, Charlie's presence lingered. In the quiet moments, I'd sometimes feel the weight of him beside me, hear the soft thud of his tail against the floor. It wasn't sadness I felt, but gratitude, for the years we'd shared, for the love he'd given me, for the way he'd taught me to open my heart again. Charlie had been my everything when I needed him most. And because of him, I'd found the strength to build a life that was full and messy and beautiful. A life he'd always be a part of, no matter where I went. Always.